Welcome to Finding Faith in Fandoms, where Christian artists explore the spiritual themes and biblical parallels of our favorite stories. I'm your host, Jacqueline Tatro, and today I have a new guest, Katie Broach. Katie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Since this is your first time with us, can you give us a little background about your work, your faith, and your creative interests?
Absolutely. So, as Jackie mentioned, my name is Katie Broach. I am a Chicago native and I have been living outside of Boston for almost 20 years. I am a Roman Catholic who has a background in fundraising and fund development for nonprofits. And I also am a Christian artist and storyteller. I am an active member of my church as a music minister. And I'm just delighted to be here today to talk about one of my favorite topics, musical theater.
Awesome. Yeah, we met through our mutual friend, Amelia, and over the last few years, you've done a few musical theatrical productions with Imago Stage, correct?
Correct.
They're based in Christ the Redeemer, which is an Anglican church in
Danvers.
Fun fact, that church used to be Catholic, and I used to go there as a kid with my family. My sister and I would be with our parents in the quiet room in the back for families with noisy kids. The first time I'd been there in 20 years was to go see Imago Stage's shows. But yeah, it's a beautiful church and has an excellent setup. The sanctuary looks elevated like a stage, and you can do creative things with that space.
Yeah, having a thrust stage is the way the altar is shaped, that really kind of lends itself to kind of a more immersive audience experience.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about a musical that Katie was in a few years ago, and I really wanted her to be the one I talked to about this particular show because of the role that she had in it, and because we're coming from a similar background as Catholics, and this is probably the most Catholic story that we've done so far. Today we're talking about the musical and movie The Sound of Music. So some background on this story. It is based on a true story, although the movie was made in the 60s, and I feel like if it were being made today, it would end with black screen and text explaining how the Trapp family's story actually ended. They didn't provide much context, but anyway, it originated with the memoir of Maria Augusta Trapp, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers, which was published in 1957. And by then, her family was already fairly famous as a family choir in Europe and America. Her memoir inspired two German films which fictionalized her family's experiences. In English, the titles are The Trapp Family and The Trapp Family in America. Then some Americans saw those German films and were inspired by them. The musical writing duo Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein decided that it would be a good subject for a musical. So they wrote that with music by Rodgers, lyrics by Hammerstein, book by Howard Lindsay and Russell Crouse. They took a lot of inspiration from those films. So there are a lot of creative liberties taken in these adaptations. If you want the full true story, I recommend reading Maria's actual memoir. In any case, the musical opened on Broadway in 1959, and it was actually the last musical that Rodgers and Hammerstein did together because Hammerstein died of stomach cancer 9 months afterwards. The musical was then adapted to a famous film in 1965, directed by Robert Wise, and starring, of course, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer. We're recording this in 2025, so it's been 60 years since the movie was made, and it's still a classic. The stage musical is still being produced, and we're here because we love it.
Absolutely.
So, Katie, can you tell me about your familiarity with the movie and or musical, and what role did you have when you were in it?
So I played, for those of you who know the show, Mother Abbess. Mother Abbess is basically the head nun who is in charge of the abbey, and she is the mother hen, so to speak, of all the postulates. She makes sure that all of her fellow religious sisters work with them in kind of forming these young women into model sisters with certain virtues that are becoming and befit of a religious sister at that time. I guess the modern day equivalent in the church would be a vocations director and also a spiritual director. I feel like she did both of those in that role, and she was always the person in the movie and in the musical that made sure to both challenge Maria and encourage Maria as she was seeking to find her way as a Christian and as a possible religious sister, or as we soon find out later on in the story, as a wife and mother to Captain Von Trapp's children.
Yeah. And did you grow up seeing the movie or productions of the musical?
I did. I was one of those traditional theater kids. My father, in particular, was a lover of old movies, and so I grew up with Rodgers and Hammerstein. Those were some of the first songs I sang. I'm a classically trained singer, so I've been singing this stuff since I was 10, 11, 12 years old.
Nice.
And The Sound of Music has always been one of my favorites. And as a Catholic, I went to Catholic school, and so I felt a real kinship with the children. I mean, even till this day, I'm friends with many religious women and priests and, lay vocations within the Catholic Church. And I have many Christian friends who are, actors and musicians as well. So this was kind of the start of thinking about that from a kind of theatrical standpoint.
Cool. I also grew up watching the movie. My Nana really loved it, and I think introduced it to my sisters and me while babysitting us. And of course, as a little kid, I didn't understand all aspects of it. Like, I didn't understand the romance or the politics or why they were running away at the end. But so I was exposed to the music very early. We also studied it in elementary school. My music teacher showed us some parts of the movie and taught us the lyrics to some of the songs. I did see a couple productions at different points in my life. I think I saw it when I was very young. I have a memory, maybe at a high school or someplace local, of seeing it. But it wasn't until I was almost an adult, maybe in college, that I saw a community production and was struck by the message and realized, oh, this is about finding God's will in your life. And it just hit me more at that point. Maybe because I was more in the world of the church and vocations at that point. So I worked for 5 years as a reporter for the Boston Pilot, the newspaper of the Catholic Archdiocese of Boston. And that exposed me to many different religious communities. I met and sometimes worked with different religious men and women. And one of the assignments that I felt most privileged to do was writing a series of articles about the cloistered religious communities in the Archdiocese. And I was doing that right around the time that you were in the show.
That's right. That's right. I remember that.
Yeah. And I felt very blessed to be able to do that. So I got to visit. There are 5 of them. And of course, they don't let in many visitors to actually talk with the sisters. But I was able to do that and learned about their histories, heard some of them talk about the different charisms they have. That's what we call their missions or gifts. Some are more focused on prayer, others, it's a combination of prayer and work. They all have a different focus. I did seriously consider the possibility of being called to religious life. I did a couple discernment retreats with the Daughters of St. Paul because I thought that their mission of working in the media might be in line with my interests and my strengths. I eventually decided that's not what I feel called to, but I definitely gained a deep appreciation of the different types of work and prayer that sisters and brothers do. And I got to learn more about the process of discerning a vocation and that preparation. I have attended the professions of first vows for a few different communities, and it's really beautiful. It's like a wedding.
Mm-hmm.
I found out from reading Maria's memoir that the convent that she was preparing to enter was a Benedictine convent. Personally, I think she might have been better suited for maybe Franciscan spirituality, like maybe the Sisters of St. Clair or something like that, because of her exuberant personality, her sense of joy and love. But in any case, Seeing the musical as an adult hit me very differently, and I realized just what a profound message it has. Just for the sake of simplicity, we will focus on the fictionalized story that we see in the musical and movie rather than the real life Trapp family. But both have a strong theme of figuring out what God's will is for your life. From the very beginning of Maria's memoir, she talks about how that was the biggest thing that she had learned as a postulant. And it's one thing to understand theoretically that you need to seek and follow God's will, but it's another thing to actually do it when
Yes.
you're confronted with,
Yes.
when you're presented with a path that is totally different from what you expected or wanted for yourself. And it's a story that shows that God takes us by surprise, and you never know how things will go, where you'll end up in life.
To your point about, just trying to figure out what God is calling you to be, I had mentioned that I worked in fundraising in the church, but predominantly in Catholic campus ministry at a couple major universities, Harvard and Northwestern. And in my time there, I worked a lot with the pastoral staff, and, a lot of these young people would come in, and they were very bright, articulate students and of deep faith, but they didn't know what God was calling them within the major they were doing or minor, or if God was using all of their gifts. And so it's I always kind of think of vocation as, what is God's major for you? What is God calling you to be in life? You were given certain gifts, and whether those gifts be a talent that's singing or painting, or if you're a good listener, or if you speak with authority and people tend to listen, if you're really good at organizing people and logistics, all these are gifts, right? And we have to start framing them in the context of who God is. And so when I think about Maria, she's young. I mean, she's probably college age is how I've always pictured her. I have not read your book about the Trapp family singers when she entered the Abbey.
I think she was about 20.
Yeah, so she's right prime time there. She's like a junior in modern college. And so these are times in your life where you're really asking God, what am I called to be in light of my professional choices, my personal choices, and my spiritual choices?
Yeah. The pandemic was the time when I really started to wrestle with all of that. And I was in my mid-20s by then. And I had moved out of my parents' house. I had a steady job, but was starting to wonder, what direction is my life going to go in? Am I supposed to be doing something more at this point? Or is this a time of waiting and seeing how things play out? And yeah, that's hard. It helps to have a spiritual director like the Mother Abbess. When I rewatched the movie, I think they specified there's a mistress of postulants and a mistress of novices.
Correct.
And they're the ones who argue at the beginning
Yes.
about whether Maria is a good candidate or not.
Correct.
Yeah, and the Mother Abbess really is the mother figure to her and the
Yes.
other young sisters. She gives so much love and space for Maria to talk about her problems, and then giving guidance in the end.
Both those sisters, the mistress of the novices and the mistress of the postulants, I always kind of saw them as they had their role, they had their process, and Maria was not a process-driven character at all. And so I think that's where their frustration lied. And sometimes, we want a point A to point B to point C process with God, and that's not always the case. He might take us completely off course, or there might be kind of a dry period where you're saying, okay, where are you, Holy Spirit? Where are you, God? Where are you, Jesus? Trying to speak to me about what I'm called to do next in my life. I think of the hymn, "Here I am, Lord, is it I, Lord? I've heard you calling in the night," And so I think for Maria, much of that was she was not a process-driven person. She was all over the place. She was just loving life. And I think Mother Abbess appreciated that and knew that she had to employ a different kind of approach to Maria. And I think that when we're all going through changes in our life, I think it's important to seek different mentors and different guidance from people we trust, because they all will have different ways of showing us what the next step might be.
Yeah. For our non-Catholic listeners, or for those who just aren't familiar with how religious orders and discernment of vocations works, it's a mutual process of discernment. So the individual who is thinking about becoming a sister or a brother or a priest has to discern if God is calling them to that. But then also the order or community that they are applying to has to decide if they are a good fit. They have to discern if God is calling them to that life. the kind of language sounds weird and outdated today. This is the 1920s and 1930s when this story takes place. If your vocation director or your pastor or whoever was your spiritual authority told you that something was the will of God, you took that as the will of God.
Right.
Of course, we know now that can lead to instances of spiritual abuse, but in the context of the time, I think that that was the understanding. And so if you were seeking God's will, that was kind of how you looked at it. But yes, as you're saying, Maria, she has this deep love of God and wants to serve him. She thinks the best way to serve him is to become a sister. But she doesn't seem to find him so much in the confines of the convent and that structure of life. She feels closest to God in nature, in the mountains. She says that they were actually what led her to discover the Abbey, and she wanted to be part of their way of life. This is my own headcanon. I'm talking more about the character in the musical than the real life person, but I think Maria is a character that could potentially have ADHD or something similar. As I've mentioned before, I have ADD, and some of the things that she struggles with sound like symptoms for undiagnosed or untreated ADHD. One thing is time blindness, chronic lateness, losing track of time. They say she's always late for everything except for every meal. She generally seems to lack discipline. She's impulsive. She runs off to do her own thing without really thinking, and she can't keep her thoughts or opinions to herself, which gets her in trouble. And that's how it is for a lot of people with ADHD. But then she finds some strength in that because she understands the importance of play, of letting children or people with a lot of energy have the space to be themselves, to run around and have fun. By going to work for the Von Trapp family, she sort of ends up turning some of her weaknesses into strengths.
Yes, absolutely. Just kind of being that joyful present in the home. I mean, by way of background, Captain Von Trapp's wife had passed away, and so he was left with all of his children, and the only way he knew to run a house was his profession. He was the captain of a ship, so he ran it, but like they were a bunch of sailors. And we even remember the costumes that the children wore are kind of our quasi sailor outfits with the navy and the white. And so, you know, her coming in and bringing such joy into the house and such spirit and spunk was really transformative for those children. I mean, she really embodied this joy-filled love, this compassion that these children, not because Captain Von Trapp was not a compassionate man. We learned later on that he was quite a just and very compassionate man, but that, you know, he had his own wounds that he was trying to work through. And so he automatically went to his process. And again, the process of discernment, the process of finding God's way is not a cookie cutter process. And luckily for those children, they had the good fortune of encountering Maria as a governess, and she kind of turned their whole world upside down.
Yeah. And a big way that she does that is by introducing music, which seemingly used to be part of their lives. The captain, Georg, recognizes the song that she teaches to the children. In real life, he played the violin, but he hadn't played it since his wife died. The number of children in the show corresponds perfectly with the number of notes in a musical scale. So that works perfectly for when she's teaching them sort of basic music theory, like do, re, mi, and everything. In the U.S., we learn alphabet letters for different notes, like D, E, F, and so on and so forth. And music is, it's so much. There's this quote, I think sometimes attributed to Augustine. My mom and other people have said that singing is like praying twice.
Yes, my mother always said that too. When you sing, you pray twice. And I believe that in my heart of hearts. I really do.
Because you're not only saying the words, but you're using a gift that God gave you, our vocal ability and artistry, creativity. In our premiere episode on this podcast, we talked about the fact that God is creative. By making us in his image, he has instilled some of his creativity in us. We can't make something out of nothing the way God does, but we are sub-creators. We can be stewards of what he's given us and use that to make something. And we glorify him when we do that. So music is something that you can do to the glory of God or to praise God and to express how you feel about him and about his gifts.
Yeah. And singing in particular, I mean, I'm like I mentioned, I'm classically trained, and
Mm-hmm.
we talk a lot about breath.
Mm.
And, we talk about spirit, wind, breath of God. And it's really interesting. I was reading something once, maybe it was when I was doing Fiddler on the Roof at Imago. I was playing Golda, and I was reading about the term Yahweh,
Mm.
which is often a name for God. And Yah and Way are what were translated in Hebrew to mean to be an inhale and an exhale. So when you
Oh.
actually breathe, when you inhale and you exhale, you are speaking the word of God. So I think there's a lot of beauty in that, that even by our nature of being alive and breathing, and when you're using breath
Mm.
and adding and amplifying it with song, it just really amplifies what God is calling you to be. So when Maria sings, I feel like this is really her sung prayer. And when Mother Abbess sings her very famous song, Climb Every Mountain, that very much is a sung prayer anthem and a tribute to God.
Mm-hmm. I love that song so much. Yeah. I guess around the middle of the story, or maybe, I guess, in Act Two,
Mm,
when Maria is having this sort of internal crisis
mm,
because she realizes that she's falling in love with the captain, or at least suspects that he's falling in love with her, and feels like she wants to be with this family, with these children. But there are two obstacles. One is she is set on becoming a nun, and also the captain is supposed to be getting engaged to this other woman, the Baroness. According to her memoir, it was actually a princess. But
really?
yeah, but there was a situation where it looked like he was going to marry someone else. Very much like Jane Eyre. So she goes back to the Abbey, and they make it more dramatic in the film and musical, but she did go back to consult her novice mistress, who then talked to the Mother Abbess, and they actually called the community together to pray about it. We can talk about that scene in the show because I think that is the turning point basically for Maria and for the journey that they're all on.
Yeah, because leading into that, she is just so torn because in the previous scene, she was dancing with Captain Von Trapp, and they kind of looked into each other's eyes, and there was a connection there, and there's a moment where they both understood that this was more than just a relationship of, an employer and employee.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were real feelings there, and so she was very torn coming back, and, Mother Abbess was expecting her to come. She sensed something was off because Maria became hyper focused.
Mm-hmm.
She was so afraid of what was going to happen if she didn't go with plan A. She was afraid to kind of confront plan B, which
Mm-hmm.
meant pursuing a life with Captain Von Trapp and his family, that she was really, really torn. And I remember that I was looking at some of the lines earlier today. I was trying to remember some of the kind of spiritual guidance that Mother Abbess gave her. And she mentioned to Maria, she asked her what happened. She didn't try to narrate it for Maria.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted Maria to talk about it and say it in her own words so that she could really hear for herself what God was calling her to do.
Mm-hmm.
She asked Maria, "How did this happen? Why did you do this?" And Maria responded, "I was frightened." And she said, "What can't you face? Our Abbey's not to be used as an escape." And she's like, "I can't face him again." She asked questions, and I think about Jesus. When people asked him a question, he always responded with a question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really how you get to the heart of a teaching moment, I think, in our gospel. And I think Mother Abbess was wise to use those tools. Again, she questions, "Do you like him, Maria?" And she said, "Oh, yes." "Did you let him see how you feel?" I mean, again, it was all these
Mm-hmm.
kind of things. But what really struck me, and again, this musical, and this story, I should say, took place before Vatican II, which, for
Mm.
people who don't understand what that is, that's when the church became more lay focused on people who were not religious in terms of participation in the life and work of the church in more substantial ways. And so, the idea of a woman being a lector, or a woman being a song leader, or being in charge of a big ministry at their parish was not a conceivable thing really
Mm-hmm.
before Vatican II. And so there weren't any other paths for Maria at that time, to your point.
Yeah, she couldn't lead a choir in her local parish or
Correct.
something like that. Like, that's something that would be left to the priests or seminarians, probably.
Sure. And so she may have been called to do that if it was a more modern time. And so she didn't have as many options. Again, plan A or plan B. And so then she tells her that the love of a man and a woman is holy too. And that just breaks open that whole idea for her that you can be holy and still love another person. You can be holy, and in a modern age, there's talk of you can be a vocation of a single person, a vocation of being a parent, a vocation of joining a religious community. There's all different kinds of ways you can live out your faith that aren't you have to be a priest or you have to be a nun, although many people are still very much called to that, and they are very much welcome. So I think for her to say to her that that's holy, to define that relationship and that calling as being as meaningful, I think was a real turning point for Maria.
Yeah. I wrote down the line, I'm not sure if it's in your script, but in the movie, she phrases it, well, she's talking about basically the vocation to love. Like, we are all called to love. And Mother Abbess says to Maria, what you must find out is how God wants you to spend your love. Because some are called to love a spouse and children, and that is the work that they're called to do. And she also clarifies, if you love this man, that doesn't mean that you love God less.
Correct.
Jesus says the first commandment is to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. But then the second commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's going to look different for each of us based on whatever kind of lifestyle or ministry we're called to. That scene and the song she sings, then Climb Every Mountain, is basically her saying, you have to find out. She talks about how you can't run away from your problems. This was something I realized in my own experience when I was thinking about religious life. I could understand how attractive the structure and kind of security of life with a religious community would be. Even though you never know what's going to happen, you may be assigned to something totally unexpected, but there's almost like a weight lifted off you if you're making a vow of obedience. I've actually heard sisters say that's not the case, but people think that that means you won't have to make your own decisions anymore, because that always comes with the pressure of what if I choose wrong or something like that. You can't choose something just because it seems safer or easier. You have to figure out, okay, what is it I'm meant to be doing? What does God actually want me to do with the love I have, the gifts I have?
And Maria then not only physically helped the children and Captain Von Trapp, Mother Abbess did help Maria, kind of look towards that future and what that future looked like, and the challenges and the struggles of kind of committing wholeheartedly to another person, which would be equally as difficult as taking the first path she chose,
Yeah.
And in turn, I think that message then kind of shifted also to Captain Von Trapp as well, because,
Absolutely.
He had to climb a real moral mountain too against anti-Semitism and xenophobia, certainly very timely things we're facing in this world right now. And how do you use conscience or use discernment to kind of confront what your values are and what you stand for as a Christian, and how you're going to move forward in this life, being a loving, kind person and raising a family and exposing your children to those same Christian values you want them to share. So, and I don't think he would have been able to do that as easily if Maria wasn't standing by his side.
Yes. I know. As a kid, that part of the story with the Angelus always seemed weird and tacked on. But yeah, they're actually connected, and it's partly due to Maria's influence that he now has the strength to make that difficult choice that will put him and his family in danger, but he knows that's the right thing to do, to not accept the commission from the Nazis.
And he's definitely, as the married vocation, I'm sure he and Maria, the real life Maria and Captain Von Trapp had very heavy conversations about this and what this meant and who they were as people and what they stood for. And so I think that this whole notion of the mountain, there's a go tell it on the mountain, and, mountains are used all the time. Martin Luther King, when he spoke about injustice, said, I have seen the mountaintop. So,
Yeah.
It really much is something to aim for, to stretch for, whatever that is and whatever God is calling you to be.
Yeah, there's so much mountain imagery in the Bible. Mountains are places of encounter for Moses, for Jesus and Peter, James, and John at the Transfiguration.
Yes.
In some contexts, they can be symbols of danger or struggle, but then also in this story, they're also a place of safety in a sense and of escape, but then also of the hard work of finding your path, finding God's will for your life.
Mm-hmm. You know, Climb Every Mountain has kind of become an anthem for a lot of people. People that don't even use it from a religious context because it's such an inspiring, the lyric is so inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. It's like all great anthems in musical theater. Like you think about another one that Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote, You'll Never Walk Alone from Carousel. And it's very much a similar kind of context that, you know, God is always by our side and we have to figure out where we're called to be. Or in Man of La Mancha, which was not written by Rodgers and Hammerstein, the story of Don Quixote and the idea of to dream the impossible dream, to fight the unreachable foe. It's the same kind of notion that there's something out there that we're all kind of seeking. And I think about in today's day and age, you know, we're all seeking so much and our attention is getting smaller and smaller by the minute. And the idea just to stay focused on something is really a dying art. And so for me, when I was doing this role, I did a lot of prayer. I reflected a lot on, you know, both who she was growing up as a young woman, probably in a time when she was probably told or was very strongly pushed into maybe choosing the religious life. I don't know a lot about Mother Abbess's background, but I do know that she was there for quite some time and that she was very well respected within the abbey. And, you know, I reflect a little bit more about how she could learn from her mistakes or maybe the wrong choices she made in her faith or in her spiritual journey. And she didn't want to see those happen to Maria because she really, really cared about Maria. As Jesus looks as, you know, being a shepherd, I think very much Mother Abbess saw the postulants and the novices and all the fully professed sisters as her sheep to shepherd, and she was going to help lead them to do great things in her community. And Maria was somebody very special to her.
I think I've seen different versions of the stage show. Sometimes they'll have a song sung by the captain and his two pals, the Baroness Schrader and Max. And Max is a great character, but their attitude is basically just get along, let things happen, what will be, and just try to do what's best for yourself. That's sort of like the antithesis of the story, the point that's the other songs and storylines are making.
It's almost like when you read a book. I have members of my family that like to read a book at the very end and know what happens, you know, and then go back, you know. And I think it's interesting. It's like we all know how the story ended in terms of World War II and all the choices they made. So we're watching this in anticipation of, please make the right choice. Please make the right choice. We know in the back of our mind all the things that are coming that they have no concept of yet. You know, the horrors of World War II and anti-Semitism and the concentration camps and all the death and destruction that came from that war. But to see them just be so casual, like Max, about, oh, what will be, let's not ruffle feathers.
Yeah, at least the Angelus happened peacefully. I mean, yes, in a sense, but, like, it's still a bad thing.
Yeah, it's still a bad thing. Or, like, Elsa Strader's like, you know, we have to be on their team. And it's like, how this is a real question too of social justice, and that's you know, certainly a tenet of the church. People on the margins and people who are persecuted, and you know, how when you see those signs coming, how do you speak that? How do you speak truth to power and say, no, this is not right, because I want to be a good person, and also because my faith tells me that this is something that is absolutely awful, and not living out the gospel of Jesus to love our neighbor as ourselves. So that's the interesting thing about The Sound of Music. I mean, we know so much about what's to come. It's like you see a train barreling in and you see people standing on the track and you're like, please just get out of the way, just get out of the way. But they don't see it for what it is.
Yeah, and that's kind of a big thing. How much do you compromise and where do you draw the line?
Correct.
And yeah, that's something that everyone who came under Nazi occupation had to decide at some point. Would they try to go along and play their game, fight their war, and see how they could maybe gain some advantage from it? Or would they try to stay true to their principles, true to their country, true to their faith, even if that demanded sacrifices of them? What are you willing to give up one way or the other? I mean, you work with what you know and try to rely on God for guidance.
That's right. And that's with vocation. I mean, you know, taking it all back to kind of what Mother Abbess's role is really helping Maria discern and figure out in spite of everything now. And now she's a mom, and I mean, she was at the wedding. The nuns blessed her marriage. They came in, they carried her veil for her,
Yeah,
and a
that
very
is such a beautiful
beautiful, it's a
scene.
beautiful moment. And they shared in her just the notion of, they loved her and they were there to help her. They saw this as a beautiful vocation too,
Yeah.
and they were celebrating that with her and honoring her with that, and saw it as with this. And it probably also for them, I would hope, it kind of strengthened their faith in God, saying, "Yeah, it's not my will, it's your will, and this is what was the will for this young woman."
Yeah. A little more background. The religious life, consecrated life, and marriage, and the priesthood as well. Each of those vocations mirrors God's identity and his relationship with us. The love between a man and a woman that actually is symbolic of the love that God has for us, his people, the church, humanity. In the Old Testament, that imagery was often used for God and the people of Israel. And for the priesthood, the priest represents Christ and the church is his bride.
Yes.
And for woman religious, they're considered brides of Christ as well.
Yes.
And that's why the ceremony for their profession, making vows, looks so much like a wedding ceremony. And sometimes they may even have a ring for those who wear habits that basically has the same significance as a wedding ring. It shows I am claimed, I am committed to my love. It's wonderful to see people of different vocations encouraging all kinds.
Yeah.
Whether it's a religious sister teaching people about marriage and family life, or a mother and father teaching their children about the priesthood and religious life, letting them know there are many paths you can take that God may call you to as a way to love him and serve him and love and serve his people. And we need all of them. Part of what make the church so beautiful is having that diversity and that flourishing and sort of mutual encouragement between them. I will talk a little bit about the real life story because it's just so interesting. So basically, the musical compressed the timeline of their lives. Really, Maria and Georg were married for many years and actually had more children before the Nazis annexed Austria to Germany.
So they did have, I didn't realize they had more children.
Yeah, so their family grew. And Maria talks about how she taught them more about different Catholic traditions, and she talks about the folk traditions of Catholic countries and how they express their faith and how they practice that together. But after the Anschluss, it wasn't like one big decision, although that was a significant one when he was offered this role in the Navy. But also, they were already kind of famous as a family choir at that point, and they were actually invited to sing at Nazi events.
Really?
And yeah, and they knew how risky it was to say no. And I think they tried the best they could. There was a conversation about a flag, like in the movie. And yeah, at first the captain thinks like, oh, maybe this is God's will because Hitler is now our head of state and I'm a Navy man. Maybe it is my duty to do this. It says that he decided eventually, when I took my oath, I swore I would serve God and my country. This would be against God and against my country. I would break my old oath. And then later, they were chosen to represent former Austria to sing at Hitler's birthday.
Wow, I did not realize that.
Yeah. So, like, it supposedly would be such an honor, but they were like, well, we have to say Heil Hitler, and the Nazis don't let them sing religious songs, so they couldn't sing most of their repertoire. And then there's this wonderful passage, I'm just going to read it. So the father, Georg, is talking to the children, who range from adults to very small children by this point. We have the choice now. Do we want to keep the material goods we still have? Then we shall have to give up the spiritual goods, our faith and our honor. We can't have both anymore. We could all make a lot of money now, but I doubt very much whether it would make us happy. I'd rather see you poor, but honest. If we choose this, then we have to leave. Do you agree? As one voice came the answer, yes, Father.
And I think maybe I would speak to a little bit to in vocation about when is your maybe your professional career not in line with where you stand values wise, and how do you figure that out, or how do you become the best Catholic version of a doctor, a lawyer, a writer, whatever the case might be. We talked about that a lot in campus ministry, and I can bring that back to Mother Abbess about like, what does it mean to represent those values, those Christian expressions of justice and peace and love and compassion and preferential option for the poor in sometimes a job that doesn't seem like it's quite so, that has a reputation of being either, warmongering or taking advantage, like those kind of things too. So
Yeah.
it makes total sense. I mean, they were incongruent. There comes a point in time, I think, where that's the sign from God saying, okay, how can you still serve me best? And obviously they were Nazis, so that was like a no-brainer. Hello. But, still, I mean, the challenge, how do you stand up against somebody who doesn't represent the kind of Christian life you want to lead, whether you be a politician or a boss or maybe even a pastor or a religious leader in a particular parish or church that you don't necessarily align with in terms of their approach to your faith or their own personal charism. So you have to find what works for you and what's going to fill your need and what God wants for you in your life.
Yeah. It helps if you find a spiritual director or a mentor who can help you understand the scriptures and how God speaks to us and sort of guide you through that decision-making process.
Yeah, and I also think too, a lot of this, it's almost like when Jesus is on the mountaintop and the devil tempts him, it's like, I can give you all this if you just follow me. And he's like, I can't do that. I can't give up who I am and what I'm called to be in this world. And so I feel like Gaylord and Way was between, this sense of pure evil. But I think for him, it was just a no-brainer. And he's like, I have to follow God's will. And Mother Abbess felt the same way with Maria. We got to protect her, protect these people. If it even means risking our lives to save these people, this is what we must do, because that's what God's calling us to do.
The story ends on such a powerful note with them running away into the mountains. Unfortunately, that's not geographically or historically accurate. So,
bummer.
Yeah, no, they talk about crossing the Alps to get from Austria to Switzerland, but Salzburg is over 200 miles from Switzerland, and their home was only a few kilometers away from the border with Germany. So by going the direction that they seem to be going in the film, they would actually have been approaching Hitler's Eagle's Nest retreat. In real life, they took a train to Italy, and apparently the captain had Italian citizenship because he had been born in a place that was under Italian government at the time. And so from Italy, they traveled to Switzerland, France, then London, and then eventually to the United States. And they ended up settling in Vermont. My family has actually passed by the ski lodge that they ran in Stowe, Vermont, I think.
Yes. Yes, I was just telling somebody about it the other day.
Yeah, that's like, you wouldn't expect there to be a local connection right here in New England, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, they went to those mountains instead.
One thing that I think is sort of missing from the story is when they're talking about discerning God's will, they don't talk very much about the concept of free will, which is God gives us the freedom to make decisions for ourselves. And he does that hoping that we will choose him and choose what he wants for us, because he wants what's best for us. So there's also this element of we need to learn to trust him even if we don't understand what he's working towards. And he leaves us free to say yes or no to the path that he is calling us to.
Yes, and I think that Maria she still could have made the choice that, no, I'm staying here.
Yeah.
I'm staying here. I'm sure they would have been happy to have her stay there and, confess her vows, profess her vows. But the notion that, yes, we are open to God's call, but it's ultimately up to us to decide if we're going to take his hand and walk that journey with him.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of what makes Maria such a wonderful role model, both in real life and in this fictionalized version of her story, is the fact that she is seeking that, and she has a very strong will of her own, but she is always trying to defer to him. And yeah, then she ends up teaching others to do the same.
Absolutely, she does. And I'm sure her children begin to take on or appreciate those same kind of values because they love her so much.
Yeah.
At the end of Sound of Music, when they are fleeing the Nazis and the families hiding in the abbey. I mean, the sisters take on great risk. And for them too, that's another expression of their vocation about how am I going to help these people that are in need? How am I going
Mm-hmm.
to help these people flee from a very difficult situation to hopefully a better life where they can live the values they want to live? Not so different from modern immigration that we're dealing with right now. So, I mean, these themes in The Sound of Music and these themes of vocation and themes of how is God calling me to live out my faith are as timely as ever. And I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
important that we look at this story at different phases of our life, whether as a child, maybe as a young adult, as somebody middle age, and even somebody older. I think you can find a different narrative in there for yourself
Mm-hmm.
that will resonate with you in your spiritual journey.
Yeah. Well said. Well, this has been such a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Katie,
Thank you
for
so
joining me for
much.
this.
This was a lot of fun. I could talk about theater all day long and my faith. So appreciate the time.
Katie, where can people find you or learn about your work?
So I've recently created my performer website, which is www.katiebroachsoprano.com. That's katiebroachsoprano.com. And you can see a little bit of my work and some photos from The Sound of Music.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us. I'll include some links in the show notes, including my past articles about religious sisters and communities. For more content like this, visit our website, findingfaithinfandoms.org. Check out our Patreon if you are interested in supporting the show. And please pray for us and for everyone listening to our content. We really appreciate your support. Thanks and God bless.